Do you have piles of stuff that you no longer enjoy because the technology to use them has moved on, but you can't bring yourself to part with them? I'm talking things like, for example, LP records or cassette tapes or videotapes. If you're in this boat, you may be a techno hoarder. I'm an extreme one, and I'm about to try to talk you through what it's like and what you can do about it. Hi, I'm Gary. I make videos about technology subjects that interest me, and hopefully some of them will interest you. Today we're going to talk about techno hoarding. What is a techno hoarder? Well, everybody knows what a hoarder is. It's someone who amasses a lot of stuff that they don't really need, and they can't bring themselves to part with it. Now, that doesn't sound terribly different from a collector. A collector is someone who acquires typically a lot of stuff, which he may or may not really need, and he's probably not willing to part with it either. So what's the difference between a collector and a hoarder? Well, generally, collectors are intentional in their acquisitions. They acquire things that they're interested in or that they think are valuable. They organize them. They show them to people. Hoarders typically don't do any of those things. They just acquire a whole bunch of stuff that they don't have uses for. Extreme hoarding is actually considered a mental illness, whereas collecting is a hobby. So where does techno hoarding fit in this? A techno hoarder is someone who has acquired a bunch of stuff because he wanted it, which is to say he collected it, but he's not really enjoying it anymore because of changes in technology that make it unusable or at least not practical to use. And he's still not willing to part with it. I'm going to give you a very short history of how technology advancement led to today's what I'll call left behind mess. And I'm going to use myself along the way as a horrible example. Let's start with music. Long-playing records were introduced in 1948 so that people could actually purchase for their own use musical performances. At about the same time, reel-to-reel tape recorders became available so that you could record your own music, or perhaps borrow your friends. And LPs and reel-to-reel tape in particular coexisted until the 1960s. In 1963, audio cassettes were introduced, and they did cut into the market for records to some extent. But basically all these formats coexisted until CDs were introduced in 1983. At that point, the market for other formats of pre-recorded music began to decline rather sharply. CDs were the preferred way to listen to music until about 2001, when the first streaming services began to appear. And since then, they've become so popular that now most people listen to music through some kind of streaming service. Even people of my generation have adopted them pretty broadly, so that the market for CDs has shrunk to the point where for the past several years, there are actually more LP records being sold. A similar thing happened with video. People began to be able to make their own 8mm home movies back in the 1930s. And that was pretty much the only way you were going to be able to watch yourself and your family activities until the 1970s. In 1975 and 76, the Betamax and VHS video cassettes were introduced. And at that point, you could buy a camera that used those, make your own home movies, but you could also buy pre-recorded movies or music performances or whatever. There were a number of other video formats that popped up along the way. Sony's Hi8 digital video cassettes for camcorders and Laserdisc for commercial movies. But in 1996, the digital video disc, the DVD, appeared, and all the tape-based video formats went into decline fairly quickly because DVDs had higher image quality, they were more permanent, they were easier to handle, and players for them were a lot cheaper. The Blu-ray disc came out in 2006, and it did offer higher video quality than DVDs, but unfortunately it came out about the same time as video streaming services were starting up. Most people now watch movies or other video formats on streaming video, and so the market for owning a physical copy of a movie has dwindled to a very low level. It's the same old story with photographs. Film actually had a pretty good run from the time roll film was first invented in 1889 until the first digital cameras for consumers were introduced in the 1990s. Color slides became practical with Kodachrome in the 1930s, and I shot mostly color slides. But the introduction of practical consumer digital cameras in the 1990s meant that film and film cameras and all the paraphernalia that went with them became relics of the past. The final nail in the coffin was the introduction of the iPhone in 2007 with its camera. And today, practically everyone owns a smartphone, and every smartphone has a camera. So what do we need cameras at all for? Particularly film cameras. I sold all my film cameras years ago for peanuts, and I still have a large pile of darkroom equipment that I haven't yet managed to part with. One more technology that suffered a similar fate was maps. Maps used to be something you got on paper, and some people had a lot of them. Thanks to Google, paper maps are pretty much a thing of the past. So here's the question. If you are a techno hoarder, do you really want help with it? If so, I'd recommend you don't postpone it any longer. I did, and it's left me in the situation I'm in nowadays, with way too much stuff to be willing to spend the time to do something with it. So what can you do? There are really two paths you can take. If you're content to do without all this obsolete media because you're okay with music or video streaming services, then you can do nothing and ignore it and leave it for the next generation to deal with, which is probably what's going to happen with some of mine. You can throw it away, but that's really hard for most people, either because they have some sentimental attachment to it or because they spent a lot of money on it, and you hate to feel like it's lost. You can try to sell it on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or eBay, but I have to tell you the odds are against you. Or you can donate it to a thrift store in the hopes that someone else will buy it and someone will get some use out of it, so you won't feel so bad about giving it up. If you're not happy with any of those alternatives, then the thing to do is to convert it to some usable form where you can still enjoy it, even if you can't enjoy the physical media. Fundamentally, what you need to do is to have or to find a player for it and get some kind of converter for it to convert it to a digital format. Or in some cases, there are commercial scanning services that will convert your old home movies or your old videotapes to a digital format. They're not cheap, but it may be less expensive than setting up to do it yourself, depending on how much you have to convert. If you have a player, you can certainly acquire a converter probably even a relatively cheap one that you can get from Amazon, or you can buy something a little more sophisticated that may give you a higher quality result. For analog audio in particular, almost any form of analog music can be converted to digital really easily by using one of these cheap Chinese converters like I talked about in one of my earlier videos. You can do the same thing for video, although the quality of the result is going to depend on what kind of a player you have and what kind of output it produces. If all you have is composite video, you'll wind up with something that looks pretty much like your old videotapes, but certainly no better. I'm lucky enough to have a Blu-ray player which also plays video cassettes, and it has an HDMI output. So at least I'm getting the maximum quality you can get out of them, which still isn't very high, frankly. They're VHS video cassettes. And for your old photos, the process is similar, but it's liable to take more time and/or more money. You can buy a film scanner that will scan either your old negatives or your old slides. A number of years ago, I bought a fairly decent Nikon film scanner and scanned all 40,000 of my slides. It took a long time, but I got it done, and now I have them all available on my computer. Film scanners, frankly, are a dying breed, and you're liable to spend at least several $100s for one that will do any kind of a decent job. There are companies that will scan those for you as well, but they're really expensive because that's almost exclusively a commercial service as opposed to a consumer one. Your old prints can be scanned on a flatbed scanner. I've managed to scan several thousand of my parents' old photographs using nothing but a flatbed scanner. One fringe benefit of converting your old photographs is that you can make photo books from them, or at least from the most interesting or the best or the most historic ones. And that's really a pretty good way to preserve them. Photo books are likely to have a longer useful life than your digital images, to be honest, because they're printed on paper and you don't need any technology to enjoy them. Speaking as an extreme techno hoarder myself, the bottom line I guess I'd like to pass on is this. You can still make use of your old music and your old videos and your old photographs. You can convert them to some form. You can still get some enjoyment out of them. And I personally think it's worth doing, even though it will take a fair amount of time, and it may involve spending some money. But wouldn't you rather do that than have them sitting on shelves or in boxes, staring at you, making you feel bad because you haven't done anything with them and you really don't want to just trash them? So don't wait until you're 80 years old like I am to start on this. Get with it. And if you're not a techno hoarder, now you know what to watch out for. I hope you enjoyed this video. I am going to leave a few links to some of the kinds of equipment that I talked about in the video. I'm not recommending these specific things because most of them I haven't used myself. But like I said, they're out there and they will work for you. You're welcome to leave a comment or a like or to subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.